Hi guys, so The Horror of Frankenstein is probably the least horror out of all of Hammer's Frankenstein films, go figure. So before we get into it, a quick reminder that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today. This movie is over 50 years old. So in 1970, Hammer decided to reboot their Frankenstein series with what is largely a reimagining of The Curse of Frankenstein, albeit done in a more camp sort of a way. Peter Cushing was quietly nudged aside for this one and replaced with Ralph Bates, an actor who at the time this came out would have been young enough to have been Cushing's son, certainly. So this was an attempt to go younger, funnier, sexier, perhaps with one eye on the 1970s and the changing of the times. Jimmy Sangster directed this film and largely wrote it as well, although I mostly think of Sangster as a writer. But the ironic thing about this film is that it was directed quite well for me, but not necessarily written very well. I promised myself when I put this on the other night for the second time in my life that I wouldn't just compare it to The Curse of Frankenstein, which for most people is a horror masterpiece, but it's so difficult not to compare it to that film. There were several times throughout this film the other night where I was kind of thinking, oh, that's not as good as The Curse of Frankenstein, and neither is that. But that is the Horror of Frankenstein's curse, unfortunately, no pun intended. There are lots of really cool, funny moments in The Horror of Frankenstein, lots of good ideas, like the big whiteboard thing that Frankenstein uses to write down his anatomy and various number references and stuff, plus the vat of acid he uses to get rid of unwanted body parts. Lots of innovative, cool stuff, lots of funny scenes, good jokes, but they're just solitary moments. When I look at this film as a whole, it's quite unsatisfying, I think. This is not, if this was a meal, it wouldn't digest very well as an overall thing, especially compared to The Curse of Frankenstein. The best example I can give for this is the ending. When I first watched this film like 3 years ago, I actually thought the ending was quite humorous and good. You know, watching Frankenstein's monster be swallowed up by the vat of acid, I thought it was a good punchline. I was kind of like, okay, ha, that's a good way of getting rid of the body and keeping Frankenstein out of jail. Well done. Okay, I liked that. But rewatching the film this week with my more critical hat on, because I knew I was going to be doing a review, yeah, I didn't like that ending as much. It just feels a little bit half-baked. Like the character of Frankenstein has gone nowhere with this turn of events. He's not changed as a person from first minute of this film to the last. And when I picture what happens after this story, I presume that Frankenstein will just get another body, carry on, you know, so nothing's really ended or been sorted in this whole situation. His relationship with the Veronica Carlson character still feels like it's got more strides to take, that there's more to be resolved there. So this almost feels like it could have been the halfway point of the film, this ending, if we'd have got there fast enough. You know, it definitely feels to me like Jimmy Sangster wanted to make this the first of another long series of films, and he didn't want to fall into that trap of having to constantly find excuses to bring Frankenstein back for the dead, as always seemed to be happening with the Peter Cushing ones. But the trouble is, those Cushing films, they always had a nice solid ending, even if there had to be a little bit of narrative jiggery at the start of the next one to get it going again. Ending this film with this scene, oh, we've lost one body, the end, it doesn't work as well for me. If this film came out today, and it'd be something on Netflix called like the Riverside Frankenstein Chronicles or something like that. Oh, we're going to give you this film, we're going to set it up nicely, and we'll possibly have a season 2, and we'll go on from there. But yeah, just nowhere near as satisfying. I'll give him his due. Ralph Bates does a very good job of portraying Frankenstein, especially in the first half of this movie. He actually makes me think, for large portions of this, like he is the younger version of the Cushing version, even though this is obviously definitely a different universe. The trouble is, this character just doesn't go anywhere, as I've already sort of hinted. You know, he starts out as a kind of teenage wise guy, and then by the end of the movie he's like a mid-20s wise guy, but there's no character arc, literally nothing. He's in completely the same place at the end of this movie as he is at the start, and you compare that to The Curse of Frankenstein, the end of that film, when Victor is in the jailhouse and he looks like he hasn't slept and he's got all those conflicting emotions on his face, he realises that he's never going to finish his work, and you can tell there's part of him that regrets everything he's done. There's another part of him that would do it all over again, but just try and not get caught. He realises that he's lost his best friend, his fiancée. It's all kind of hitting him like a truck at the same time, and Cushing plays it brilliantly. You get that dramatic music as you realise he's heading off to the gallows, and you've gone on this whole journey with this character throughout the film, and it's just fantastically written, but not in this film. This film is just one big long straight line of the character just not moving forwards or changing or experiencing anything remotely interesting. Another character who's not written very well in this is the one played by Veronica Carlson. I can't think of the name of who she's playing in this, sadly, so I'm just going to call her Veronica. Now, at this point of Hammer, Veronica Carlson was definitely like the go-to gorgeous woman that you'd throw into one of the lead roles. You know, she'd done a Dracula film not long before this. She'd done Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. She was really good in both of those films. Those are excellent movies for me, but this is definitely the weakest role that she got out of these trio of films that she did quite close together. If you look at her character in this, I mean, she had a crush on Victor as a teenager, apparently, and then he went away to uni for 5 years. She knew that he was going to be going away for at least that length of time, and also that there was a possibility he would never return at all, because, let's face it, how many people go off to uni and then eventually return to their village afterwards? In any era, in any country, that doesn't tend to happen that much. So definitely a chance she would never see Victor again. And yet she doesn't go out with any other guy. She doesn't marry anyone else. She just basically stays single forever. That seems to be what she's heading towards at the time Victor comes back in this film. I have a real problem with that. Now, I know this is meant to be a camper, sort of lighter Frankenstein story, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to yearn for certain elements of characterization done properly. And having this character, especially one who looks like Veronica Carlson, just stay permanently single, she never gets with any guy, that just does not compute for me at all. She's got a father who is perfectly comfortable with her life choice. In that sort of era where women were expected to marry, it's really hard to process. They needed to have had this woman get with some other guy, and then Victor comes back, and then maybe she remembers her feelings for Victor and pulls away from her husband back towards Victor. They could have done it that way. Maybe the husband is not a particularly nice guy in this scenario and needs to be taken out by Frankenstein's monster. They could have gone that whole angle. But one thing you definitely can't do is just leave the poor girl single for like 5 or 6 years. It just makes absolutely no sense. And then Veronica, so the script gets this character to the castle, right? But then the script still does nothing with the character. Like her and Victor, they don't then become romantically involved, you know, just to spice up the plot late on, to maybe get the maid enraged. Veronica's just at the dinner table now and again. She shows up at dinner to sort of be there, but Victor doesn't notice her. It's just not good at all. There comes a point at the end of this where the monster is sort of grappling with Veronica, and it's like the film is saying, look, the main female star is being attacked by the monster. This is a terrible moment. What's going to happen? And I'm thinking, well, we don't really care, because this character, this is someone who Victor has barely noticed throughout this film. It's not that big a deal if she dies. I mean, if it was the maid being attacked by the monster very late on, it might be a different matter. Really, they should have switched it around and had the Veronica Carlson character killed in the storeroom and have the maid survive to the end, because the maid has been at least a crucial, integral character with Victor throughout this. Okay, she hasn't cracked him emotionally, but at least she's been sleeping with him and having some kind of romantic involvement there. The monster's pretty good in this. In fact, he's probably the best since the Christopher Lee version in Curse of Frankenstein, although that is more by accident than design. It's not like they've put an awful lot of effort into the makeup of this particular creature. It just so happens that they've got an actor in the role who looks really imposing. I mean, from the minute that this guy got up on his feet, I was like, whoa, don't get within grabbing range of this guy. He's like a young Rutger Hauer who's just come out of the gym. But as with every positive in this film, there's also a caveat attached to it. In this case, the characterization of the creature is very inconsistent. Like, at first he's just running amok, it can't be controlled seemingly, and then he's brought back and suddenly Frankenstein can control him and send him on a mission to kill somebody. It's just really inconsistent. There are some good kills in this film. Strangely, more of them are done by Frankenstein than the actual creature. But one thing I noticed is that all of the victims in this are really stupid and naive. It's really noticeable. So Frankenstein's buddy from uni, whose name I forget, he manages to convince Frankenstein to stop with the experiments, or so he thinks. But I mean, come on, read Frankenstein's body language. He's not telling you the truth when he suddenly says he's going to stop just like that. I mean, okay, the buddy probably couldn't have predicted that Frankenstein would then murder him, but still, this character was very naive in his final scene. Even worse is to come. So there's like a gravedigger character and his wife, who are very, very funny, by the way. I love the fact that it's the wife who does all the digging in this partnership and not the husband. But when it comes to the end of this dodgy partnership, Frankenstein is sort of like, well, I'm really sad that our nefarious dealings have come to an end, but before you go, come and have a look at this container I've got over there. Just climb up the ladder and have a peek. I think you'll find it interesting. Push. And then later on, the maid blackmails Frankenstein, and Frankenstein's response is sort of like, well, that's despicable that you would blackmail me, but anyway, before you toddle off, come and have a look in my storeroom. It's a really interesting room. I think you'll like it. Push. Is this an accidental thing that's in the script, or is it some kind of deliberate running joke? Because I'm just scratching my head thinking, how can these people be so stupid, honestly? It's not easy to find a positive in this film which doesn't have that but at the end of the sentence, leading into a corresponding negative. I guess the set design is something that I could mention that stands on its own 2 feet. As with all Hammer films of this type, it's very, very solid. I think the sets in this film would go on to be used in a couple more Hammer films, Twins of Evil and something else. I've not actually seen those 2 later films yet. I hope when I get to them that I'm not easily reminded of this film, because I can remember when I was watching Rasputin, it seemed like every scene I was reminded of Dracula, Prince of Darkness. I mean, if you're going to reuse the sets, at least change the camera angles, repaint the walls, you know, make some kind of effort so that we're not immediately thinking of the previous film Hammer had brought out. So I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I own for this. Here is my DVD copy of Horror of Frankenstein. It's one of those that was done by Studio Canal. It looks on first glance like a very basic version of the film, but on closer inspection there are actually some features on this. There's an audio commentary done by Jimmy Sangster himself, an interview with Veronica Carlson, and a stills gallery. I confess I have not checked out any of these features. I just don't quite like this film enough, although certainly if I was to watch the commentary track, I would probably learn a lot more about why this film was written the way that it was. I could see myself watching the movie itself in the future, maybe, you know, if I'm going through the Hammer films again. I'd watch this. It is fun, you know, it just doesn't quite stand up to the other Frankenstein films for me. I definitely prefer the Peter Cushing ones, like literally all of the Peter Cushing ones compared to this, but hey-ho. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give Horror of Frankenstein. So we've got 1, 2, 2.5 bloody axes out of 5. That is my average score, I suppose. I'll be back soon with another Hammer review. I think when I do get to my next Hammer review, I think I'm going to do Taste the Blood of Dracula, but don't hold me to that. I could yet change my mind. Right, until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.